Welcome to another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. It is the CFL Week 13 edition of the show, and the CFL season has gotten to Labor Day weekend, which is one of the most exciting, fun, and most anticipated weekends of the CFL season, certainly during the regular season. The annual rivalry games, you always have three of them. And then there's some kind of mix between Ottawa, BC, and Montreal in the other game. When one of those three teams gets a bye this year, Montreal has the bye week here on Labor Day weekend. And then, of course, you have your three traditional Sunday and Labor Day Monday, Labor Day Classic rivalry games, Winnipeg, Saskatchewan, and then, of course, on Monday, Toronto, Hamilton, Edmonton, Calgary. So always a fun, exciting weekend, rivalry weekend. And it's always that time in the CFL season when a lot of CFL fans equate Labor Day weekend to that time in the season where, look, now the games can become really important, right? And the push for the playoffs begins. And now it feels like we're getting closer to the stretch drive. There's only 2 months left in the CFL regular season, which will wind down late October, early November, and then the playoffs will be here. So we are getting to that point where we're almost to the home stretch of the season, and it kind of starts on Labor Day with that push that every team tries to make to solidify division, winning a division, clinching a playoff spot, home field advantage, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the games definitely do get a little bit more important when we get to this part of the season. So as far as betting wise, look, it's been a nice few weeks. We had another best bet winner last week on the CFL edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy with BC Ottawa over the total, which was good to see. And we'll see if we can deliver some more profits this week in the CFL. I'm at plus 1.6 units on the season overall. Again, I've had better results to this point in the past, but it's profitable. It's been better the last few weeks. So I can't complain. Could be a lot worse too. So I'm satisfied. I'm content. We're always trying to be better, but like I said, profitable so far this season, and you're never going to complain about that, or at least you shouldn't. All right, let's get into Week 13. Well, before we get into Week 13, as always, we talk about the team that's on a bye week first, and that is the Montreal Alouettes. What more can you say about this team? I said it after the Edmonton win Sunday night. They didn't even play anything close to their A game. It was their C- game. Let's be real. That's what it was. It was their C- game last week. They didn't play a great game at all. First half, the offense struggled. It was Cody Fajardo's first game back from injury. Could tell early in the game he was trying to find his footing. The offense had, a lot of 2-and-outs, stalled drives, and the defense uncharacteristically looked absolutely hideous in the first half. I mean, there's McLeod Bethel Thompson and the Edmonton Elks offense basically going up and down the field against Montreal's defense that whole first half. It was 17-6 Elks at halftime. But even at that point, I felt, as bad as Montreal's played, they're only down 11. They didn't play well on defense. Edmonton had no problem moving the football against them. Montreal didn't really get their offense going, but you would think after getting half of the rust out of his system that Cody Fajardo would play better in the second half. So even at 17-6 for Edmonton at halftime, didn't feel like Montreal was out of that game. And Montreal, sure enough, what do? They pitch a shutout in the second half, and they score 15 unanswered points to turn a 17-6 deficit into a 21-17 win over Edmonton. Like I said, not even close to their best game, and they still found a way to win, which tells you all you need to know about why they're such a great CFL football team. It tells you why they're the team to beat to win the Grey Cup right now. 10-1 on the season for the Montreal Alouettes. And again, they found a way. They made their adjustments. Noel Thorpe on defense made his adjustments. Cody Fajardo in the offense got into a groove and got into rhythm in the second half. And even with all the injuries they've suffered throughout the season on both sides of the ball, including to the receiving core, like they're still without Keon Julian Grant, and they're still without Tyson Philpott. They're still without Tyler Snead from early in the season. Like they're still without a lot of good receivers that are injured on this football team. And look at who's been able to step up. You're seeing all of a sudden Nate Bahar have a nice game. Charleston Rambo's been huge. What a game for Cole Speaker. 2 touchdowns, 107 receiving yards in the win against Edmonton last week. I mean, and I spoke about and by the way, if you haven't checked it out, interview with Davis Alexander last week Montreal quarterback, did a great job, of course, on not only on that shade, he was a great guest, did a great job on the show, but also did a great job backing up Cody Fajardo, filling in for Cody Fajardo when Cody was injured. And it was a great interview with Davis Alexander. Great kid. We wish him all the best. His dad, of course, has been battling cancer. I think he said on the interview, or either on the interview or before we started, that he's going back home here on the bye week to be with his family, and certainly wish them all the best, and his dad in particular. But it was great to talk to Davis. And again, Davis Alexander steps in. They go undefeated with him at quarterback. Cody comes back, struggles in the first half, and they turn it around in the second half, and here they are 10-1. So they look like they're a notch or two better than anybody else right now in the CFL. Now, we said this at times about Winnipeg last year, and we said this about Toronto a little bit last year, and neither of those teams won the Grey Cup. Because all it takes for, if as amazing as Montreal is at 10-1, and how complete they look as a football team, all it takes is that one bad game, that one stinker, right? That one really, really bad game in the playoffs when it's win or go home, and your season's over. So that's going to be the key for Montreal. Make sure you don't have that bad game, that game where you just play so horrendous you can't overcome it. Don't play it in November. If they avoid that, it's difficult to see them not winning another Grey Cup at this point in time. They're complete. They get after the quarterback. They've got I think their receiving core, and we spoke about it, Davis and I, when I interviewed Davis Alexander last week. Their receiving core, people are still sleeping on it, how deep it is. Like, they're without Tyler Snead. They're without Keon Julian Grant. They're without Tyson Philpott. And they still got all these other fucking guys stepping up, like Speaker and Bahar and Rambo and Furvius and Letcher, who's also being used as a kick returner. It's just impressive what they've got at the receiver spot. They got way more depth than people think. The passing game is so much better this year than it was last year. And that's what's made Montreal an even more dynamic, an added dimension to this team, even more complete. So it's going to be tough as fuck to beat this team going forward. And they have established themselves fully as the best team in the CFL right now. And another thing, too, that you want to point out, too, with this Montreal Alouettes team is just, how they battled all these injuries throughout the season, too, really on offense and defense, and they've managed to still overcome it. So, like I said, it's been a very impressive display by the Alouettes. The bullseye was on their back after catching fire last year, second half of the year. Winning the Grey Cup, just peaking at the right time. The question was, could they avoid the bad start they had last year, get off to a strong start, knowing that they're the defending champs? Teams are coming after them, and boy, if they done that, 10-1, I would say they've done that with this 10-1 start. So they're on the bye week, and they will be returning to action after the bye week next Friday at home against the BC Lions, as the Montreal Alouettes, despite not even close to their A game, and they still win. Sign of a good team with that victory against Edmonton on Sunday. All right, let's get into Week 13. And we will begin with the one game in Week 13 to start things off on Saturday night that is not one of the traditional rivalry games of Labor Day weekend. It is Ottawa and BC. And make sure you note where this game's being played. Yes, it is a BC home game, but it's not at BC Place Stadium in Vancouver. It's actually in Victoria, British Columbia. Touchdown Pacific is the name of this event, very similar to what they've done out in Atlantic Canada the last few years. But still, it's going to be very much like a BC home game. BC, a 3-point favorite here in Victoria. The total 51 in this game. So when you look at this matchup here, rematch of last week, which was a split for me. I was on BC, but I was also on the over. I did have a little bit more money on the over, so that's a good thing because that was what cashed. I figured Nathan Rourke and the BC offense would play better. Nathan Rourke got that game under his belt against Winnipeg the week before. Yes, he struggled, but you figured he would be more comfortable. Another week of practice would certainly help him in that game against Ottawa last week, or going into that game against Ottawa, the second week of practice. And it definitely did. He was better completion rate, threw for more yardage. Still throwing an interception, though. Still holding onto the ball a bit too much. Fumbled a couple of times. Still room for improvement. It was better, but was it Nathan Rourke at his absolute best? No. The answer is no. But definitely a step from what we saw against Winnipeg, when obviously he really couldn't get anything going against the Bombers in his first game back in the CFL with BC a couple weeks ago. This was certainly better, but there is definitely, without a doubt, still room for improvement, for Nathan Rourke and this BC Lions offense. The big news, which just came out actually before I started recording this show, Matthew Betts, and you better believe they've missed him dearly as far as a pass rush. They have not had the same pass rush this year, getting after the quarterback. Without Matthew Betts, of course, he was in the NFL. He was in training camp with the Detroit Lions, trying to make it in the NFL. The Lions cut him after last weekend. There was talk that Matthew Betts would take some time to decide his next move. Well, he didn't take long. He's decided, I'm coming back to the CFL and back to the team I was with before, the BC Lions, a team that desperately needs his services because, as I said, their pass rush hasn't been as good in recent weeks. And from all indications, and Faron Lalji on TSN saying that not only is he back and signed with the Lions for the rest of the season, and it's just for the rest of the season right now. I think he still wants to weigh his options after the season, but he's apparently going to he's not only back and he's signed for the rest of the year with BC, but he's apparently going to play on Saturday. So you would expect Matthew Betts to be back in his starting defensive end spot, and that would be a huge boost, if you will, for the BC Lions going into this game against the Ottawa Red Blacks. Meanwhile, for Ottawa, Drew Brown last week, great game, 390 passing yards, 28 of 37, great completion rate, 3 touchdowns. He did have 1 interception, but he made up for it with the 3 touchdowns. Outstanding night for Justin Hardy, 114 receiving yards. Of course, the scary incident with Jalen Acklin. He ended up getting hurt in that game, left the game due to injury. And that is a concern for Ottawa a bit going into this game, is that Jalen Acklin's out. Braylon Addison is out for this game. That's 2 starting receivers. Khalil Pimpleton is still on IR, and he did a great job coming in as a really big play weapon at receiver, great speed. He's still on IR. So they do have some skill position talent missing here. But again, they saw other players step up, like Justin Hardy. Keaton Brugling is going to get more opportunity. Dominique Rhymes will have to step up. Nick Mardner is a guy that stepped up. Nick Mardner, how about the game he had for Ottawa? 2 touchdowns, 95 receiving yards. So they may not be as they might not be in as bad of a shape as you would think, considering Jalen Acklin obviously not playing this week after the scary incident, and that was scary. I mean, he was down on the field, that his neck contorted and hit and he landed on the field in a just very painful, awkward way, right on the back of his neck. Thankfully, he's going to be okay. He was released from the hospital the day after the game. But Acklin's going to miss this game. Addison's going to miss it. But other guys did step up for the Ottawa Red Blacks. Still not totally sold on Ottawa's defense. The last couple weeks, they've given up points. They gave up 29, albeit they still won against Calgary. They gave up 27 against BC, although they still win. Their offense has been humming, though. They have now put up minimum of 20 points in 6 straight games, and they have put up 30s in 3 of the last 4 games. So there's a lot to like about Drew Brown. There's a lot to like about the Ottawa offense. Their offensive line is certainly a lot better. As far as the side goes in this game, I feel like BC -3 at home is a bit of a bargain. And if they're going to get Betts back, that's going to help the pass rush. That's going to help the defensive line get after Drew Brown a little bit. But again, it's kind of like with Nathan Rourke. We all thought Nathan Rourke, his first game, he was going to be great. This is Matthew Betts' first game in the CFL. He hasn't played a full game of action and been on the field for almost every snap in a long time. Is he going to be at his best, right away? You have to ask that question. But at the same time, I mean, you're talking about a team that can't get out of their own way. They're now 0-5 straight up, 0-5 against the spread the last 5 games, BC, to fall from 5-1 to 5-6 out of first place in the West. This is a huge game for them. Revenge spot, losing to Ottawa last week. Cheap number at home. Situationals point to BC. I don't know if they're good enough, and I'm willing to trust them enough to lay 3, though. I'm not going to be on Ottawa, though, either. It's, to me, BC, I think, is going to need this game. They almost, I don't want to say got to have it, but they need to stop the bleeding. They're avenging that game. I think Ottawa long-term has not done well in BC. You look at some of these games, 34-19, 45-13, 29-5, 26-14. Now, those were some bad Ottawa teams. Don't get me wrong. This is a much, 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 much better Ottawa team, having an incredible turnaround season, 7-2-1. But they haven't had a nice time of it here in BC in years past. They've been blown out in every recent trip to BC, Ottawa, but this is a much better Ottawa team. I think the side is too conflicting for me. I'd lean BC, but I don't feel great about it. I would actually look again at an over. 5 straight overs with these two teams head to head. And if you actually look at the situations in the CFL this year, where you've had the same two teams playing each other 2 games in a row, sometimes you think the first game goes over, the second game with the same two teams, it's going to go under, and vice versa. Well, if you look at Hamilton and Saskatchewan early in the season, both of those games went over the total. Both of them did. If you look at BC and Winnipeg just recently, both of those games went under the total. It wasn't one of those deals where one game stayed under, the other went over, and vice versa. Sometimes you look for the opposite to happen, something different. That wasn't the case. Both of those head-to-head meetings, the total result was the same. Hamilton, Saskatchewan early in the year, the totals result was the same. Both of them went over. So don't be scared to think that, okay, last week the Ottawa BC game went over. Don't be scared to think, that it can't go over again. Sometimes people try to outthink themselves, outsmart themselves, and say, well, last week went over. It's not going to go over again this week. But I don't know. I don't know if I like the defenses enough on either side at the moment, even with BC getting Matthew Betts back, we presume. And I like the way both offenses look. And I think Nathan Rourke will continue to get better. Now, third start back, he'll continue to get better and more comfortable. So cashed with the over last week, and I'm very interested in going back to it here on Saturday with Ottawa BC. Once again, up and over the total. All right, on Sunday, we've got Winnipeg and Saskatchewan, the first of back-to-back between these two teams. They always play Sunday of Labor Day weekend in Saskatchewan, and then they always play the following week in Winnipeg, known as the Banjo Bowl. We've got Saskatchewan 2.5-point home favorites in this game. The total 47.5, pretty much across the board in this one. Winnipeg, man, this team just won't stop going under the total. I mean, it's really incredible at this point. They're now 10-1 to the under this season, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It's just a remarkable run of unders they've had. Now, last week it barely went under because the total was 50. It ended at 49, 26-23, but it did still stay under. You are seeing this Winnipeg offense, though, and Zach Collaro start to improve. I mean, one of these weeks, one of their games is going to go over. I don't know if it's going to be this week, though, against Saskatchewan. It is worth noting, though, last year in the Banjo Bowl, it was a crazy game. It was 32-30 in favor of Saskatchewan in overtime, and it flew over the total on the Banjo Bowl. But the year before that, or not the Banjo Bowl, the Labor Day weekend game, 32-30 last year for Saskatchewan at home. But the year before that, it went under. The year before that, it went under. So I think the total's tricky here in this one. Winnipeg didn't play great against Hamilton last week, but they found a way. Defensively, they didn't play as good, which was surprising. Like, they completely and utterly shut down BC 2 weeks in a row. And then all of a sudden, here's Bo Levi Mitchell and Hamilton, for a decent chunk of that game, moving the football, especially in the second half, moving the football pretty well against Winnipeg. So we'll see if the Bombers can tighten things up again. They were playing, outstanding lights out defense, especially in their secondary. We'll see if they can improve on that. Saskatchewan, kind of like BC, they're trying to stop the bleeding. They're 0-4-1 in their last 5 games. They have a tie against Ottawa, but 4 losses other than that. And they have fallen to 5-5-1, even though they are still, and I mean still barely hanging on to first in the West with that record. Winnipeg right behind them. It's such a huge game here in the West Division coming up on Sunday night. I think I'm going to side with the Riders here. They're laying less than a field goal at home. They should have beat Montreal at home in their last home. Think about their last home game. They played well enough to win that game. They outplayed Montreal. They outgained them. They should have won that game. They had a million missed field. I'm exaggerating, of course, but they had several missed field goals from Brett Lothar, which really hurt Saskatchewan as far as getting that win against Montreal. We talked about it with Davis Alexander with the interview last week that some Saskatchewan fans in that game thought Davis Alexander stepped out of bounds on the game-winning touchdown that he scored, that there was an angle that shows he stepped on the white out-of-bounds line. That's up for debate. But regardless, Saskatchewan could have easily won that game, and they went toe-to-toe, and you could even say maybe outplayed Montreal in that game and just ended up on the losing side of it. And Trevor Harris was outstanding in that game, 31 of 39, almost 400 passing yards. Unfortunately for Saskatchewan, they went on the road last week against Toronto, and look, Trevor Harris is a friend of mine. Trevor Harris doesn't need Ian Cameron to tell him he was not good last week. Not as good as he's capable of. 2 interceptions, couple underthrown balls, couple of balls where passes were, kind of forced it a little bit. Not what you expect from him. Really didn't get much going offensively in the second half. Didn't even crack 300 total yards, not even 200 passing yards for Trevor Harris in that game. Toronto could have won that game by, one of the luckiest point spread wins I've had in a long time was Saskatchewan +3. The fact that Saskatchewan was totally outplayed for much of it, outgained heavily, and yet Toronto failed on how many 3rd and goals at the 1-yard line? 3. They got turned aside and turned it over on downs. It was an incredible effort by Saskatchewan on defense to even give their team a chance last week against Toronto. But unfortunately, the offense couldn't do enough to pay off the efforts that their defense gave them to try to hang into that game. So I think for Saskatchewan, though, we've got them back home. The last time they were here, they played the best team in the CFL, Montreal, and even though they lost 27-24, they should have won that game. Think about the fact that Brett Lothar missed a ton of field goals, how many points that was off the board, and one of those missed field goals was returned for a touchdown by Letcher. That's like a double-digit point swing. So Saskatchewan goes from maybe winning that game by at least a touchdown, if not double digits, to losing the game outright when they outplayed Montreal a couple of weeks ago. So that tells you they're capable here against Winnipeg. Winnipeg still only has the one road win this year, and it was that game in BC a couple weeks ago when, again, Nathan Rourke's rusty as fuck. First game back in the CFL in a very long time. So this is still not a road team I trust, Winnipeg. Again, you look at their resume this year, they're 5-6, but only one of the 5 wins has come on the road. 4 of them have been at home. So 1-4 straight up for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at home this year. I think at less than a field goal, I like Saskatchewan. Bounce back for Trevor Harris. I know Trevor well enough to know he's not happy with himself about that Toronto game. He's not. And he's going to make damn sure he'll do everything in his power to make amends for that this week against Winnipeg. And again, when you look at the result last year, Saskatchewan won in this game at home against Winnipeg. I think they got the potential to do that again here. They already beat Winnipeg earlier this year, 19-9. So, yeah, it's a revenge spot for Winnipeg, but I don't trust them on the road. They've got to pretty much win this game to cover the number. They're a 1-win road team this year. Winnipeg, that's it. They've struggled on the road outside of that 1 win against BC. I think the Riders get it done here, less than a field goal. I'm neutral on the total. I don't know. I just don't know if I can bet a Winnipeg over again until I actually see one of their damn games go over the total. They're the under machines of the CFL this year, 10-1 to the under. It's very difficult to get there with an over with a Winnipeg game right now. All right, next up, the first of the 2 games on Labor Day Monday, the annual Labor Day Classic. Yes, I will be there, and yes, probably it's safe to say my team's season is pretty much kaput as far as any playoff or Grey Cup hopes. But you still have this game. You have pride on the line. I know you're a miserable 2-9 football team, but there is still, you want to beat the Toronto Argos at home on Labor Day. Simple as that. If you're any kind of competitor or any player with any kind of guts and heart and soul, you want to win this game badly if you're Hamilton, even if your season's going down the drain. Toronto, 5-point road favorites, 52.5 the total in this game. There might be some value on Hamilton here. If you think about last week, Toronto, Chad Kelly, actually he looked better in the second half. First half, he did not play well. But, it's going to take him time. He's been out for a while. He hadn't played a game all season, didn't even have training camp with the Argos. It's going to be a bit of an adjustment, to get this offense in tune and playing at an extremely high level, the level we saw from Chad Kelly and the Argos last year. That's something you want to be aware of. 20-19 win against Saskatchewan. Again, only winning by a point. I do think when you look at this situation for the Argos, that Chad Kelly should be sharper here. You would think he's got a game under his belt, kind of like we saw with Nathan Rourke in BC. He'll be better in game 2 than he was in game 1 of the season. Same thing. We expect that with Chad Kelly, that he will be better here in his second game of the season compared to his first last week against Saskatchewan. Certainly you're not facing as good of a team or a defense this week with Hamilton compared to Saskatchewan. So you would think Toronto does improve on the offensive side of the football. Toronto had owned the Ticats recently, 6 straight wins until July earlier this year when the Hamilton Ticats 27-24, they beat the Argos. It was a weird game, though, because Hamilton took advantage of mistakes early on, a block punt that they turned into a touchdown, a fumble recovery that they turned into a touchdown. It's not like the offense did a whole lot against the Argos in that game. They nullified Cam Dukes and Nick Arbuckle, the two quarterbacks. Well, they are facing the Chad Kelly now, so it will be a little bit more difficult. Here's what I will say about Hamilton. In last week's brutally painful loss, another find a way to lose a game for Hamilton, where they played actually a very good Winnipeg team on the road, very tough. They lose 26-23. Bo Mitchell and the offense get going and move the football against a very good defense. And then as well as in his first game, I was actually surprised to see that defense play that well. And it was Chris Jones' first game as the defensive coordinator after they fired Mark Washington following the Edmonton loss. And I did not expect their defense to play that well. And up until the very final drive of the game, naturally, the one drive they need to have with the game on the line, they can't get a stop. And Zach Collaros goes right down the field and wins the game for Winnipeg. But up until that point, I saw a lot of good signs from Hamilton's defense. They started to get pressure on the quarterback finally. The secondary started to make some plays, and the secondary's been horrific. It's been god freaking awful much of the year. And even that defense started to make some plays, but great signs. And for over 3.5 quarters, they played very well. They still gave up the drive. You didn't want to see them give up late to lose the game. They've still got to find ways to get it done in crunch time, and that continues to be a problem. They've had so many close games slip away. That Winnipeg game, that Ottawa game early in the year, the first Saskatchewan game at home where they led by 10 late in the fourth quarter and they lose by 3 on a Brett Lothar field goal. They've just had trouble putting away close games, and that's a concern. But you're getting 5. It's a rivalry game here for Hamilton. You know, it feels like they haven't tapped out on the season. It looked like maybe they had in the Edmonton game. But the effort they put forth against Winnipeg was a great effort. It shows there's still a pulse with this team. There's a beating pulse. There's effort. We're trying. We're not good, but we're trying. That's what that Winnipeg game showed me about Hamilton. And if there's any game you're going to try again and really play your guts out, it's going to be a game like this against a hated rival at home on Labor Day. So this is a game I don't know if I'm getting involved with it because I'm worried that Chad Kelly finds his footing, second game, more comfortable, lights up the defense. But the first iteration of this Ticats defense post Mark Washington getting fired, it was the best defensive effort maybe of the season from this team up until that final drive that Zach Collaros put together. Like, that defense played great much of that night until that final drive. So definitely improvement there. Could this be an under maybe? 52.5 is pretty high. And you look at Toronto and Hamilton games, 5 of the last 6 have gone under. Earlier this year, it was 51, 43. We had a couple in the 40s. It's not like Toronto's offense with Chad Kelly in the first game last week with him back was firing on all cylinders. Hamilton's defense did look better. It was one of their better performances of the year. The first one with Chris Jones as defensive coordinator. I don't know if it's going to continue, but maybe given the circumstances, the total's a bit high, believe it or not, in this game on Monday with the Argos and the Ticats. I lean slightly to Hamilton. I would say Toronto in a close one. I could see Hamilton finding a way to lose by 3 like last week. So I think if you like Toronto, you can put him in a money line parlay or put him in a teaser is what I would do. But I think at the 5.5 right now, I think Hamilton showed me enough last week. It wouldn't shock me if they're competitive here in this game on Labor Day against the Argos. And keep in mind, too, the Argos, too, they're still without Wynton McManus, one of their best defensive players. They've had some injuries there that have hurt. And you look at Toronto's games, too. They're not winning a lot of games comfortably. Look at some of these recent wins. Look at all the wins for Toronto this year. Since beating BC by 8, that first game of the year, they beat Edmonton by 3, skin of their teeth. They had the 37-18 commanding win in Montreal for Montreal's first loss, which you think, wow, that's impressive. But that was the game Cody Fajardo got injured, and Montreal was just thrown off kilter from that point on. But then after that, the next win was Winnipeg for Toronto by 2, barely escaped. And then they beat Saskatchewan by 1 last week. They did have a 39-25 home win against Calgary, but you're asking this team to win by margin on the road now. And that's something they haven't done a whole lot of other than that one Montreal game. They lost at Hamilton. They lost at Saskatchewan. They lost at Calgary. And now you're asking this team on the road to win by 5 or more than 5? Dicey. They've played a lot of close games this season, especially of late, Toronto. So that's why I don't think it's a given they're going to cover the 5 here as road favorites in this game. All right, final game of Labor Day weekend. The other Labor Day Classic on Monday, the one out west, Edmonton Elks, Calgary Stampeders. Calgary, 3-point home favorites, 51.5 the total in this game. I keep on cashing with Edmonton as far as something that going into the coaching change, kind of figured there's going to come a point where we're going to be able to start betting on this team. And it didn't happen right away. They fired Chris Jones as head coach and GM. And then those first 2 games with Jarius Jackson taking over as interim, they lose 20-14 at Ottawa. They get blown out 44-28 by Hamilton. It didn't look good in those 2 games, and it was scary to see that. What is wrong here with the? No, sorry, I beg your pardon. No, it was those were Jarius Jackson games. I'm getting confused here. Yeah, those were Jarius Jackson games. 2014 at Ottawa, they lost that. That was Jarius's first game as the interim coach. Then they had that horrible game against Hamilton. Bo Levi Mitchell and the offense just went nuts, lit up that bad Edmonton defense. And then they make the quarterback change from McLeod Bethel-Thompson to Trey Ford. Trey Ford gets that win in that first start against Saskatchewan, probably their most impressive win of the year, 42-31, the game where they ran the football down Saskatchewan's throat. Then they play BC. That's the game Trey Ford gets injured, and McLeod Bethel-Thompson has to come back in as the quarterback. They beat BC 33-16. They pummel Hamilton in the rematch with the Ticats 47-22. And then last week against Montreal, you could have easily made an argument they should have won that game. You got to find a way to get some points in the second half if you're Edmonton's offense after you had a 17-6 halftime lead, and you probably win that game if you're able to at least punch it in and score a touchdown or at least some kind of points in that second half. But they weren't able to do that. They lose 21-17 to Montreal. The Elks defense played great in the first half, but had a much more difficult time containing Cody Fajardo and those great receivers in the passing game for the Alouettes as they started to get some traction and get their offense going in the second half. That was a tough one for Edmonton because, they probably could have, definitely they could have won that game. That was a winnable game for them, and they kind of let it slip through their fingers. But in their defense, that's the best team in the CFL, Montreal. No shame in that. You were right. You played them tough. You were right there. You lost by 4, and you still covered the number, which was important because I was on Edmonton plus 7.5. So they lose by 4. They cover the number. We see that they've been undervalued now. 4-0, 4 straight point spread covers, 3-1 straight up, 4-0 against the spread. Edmonton in their last 4 games. Coming into this one against Calgary, Calgary's not playing great. Now they are off a bye week. That helps, no question about that. Last time Calgary was off a bye week, it was the game against Winnipeg at home. They won 22-19 against Winnipeg coming off a bye. They're usually a pretty good team off a bye week. Dave Dickinson's got a pretty good track record in his coaching career off a bye week. That's the one little fear I have here with Calgary. You've got them coming off 2 losses, 3 losses in their last 4 games, 1 to Ottawa, 2 to Ottawa, and then the road loss at the Argos. They've been better at home this year, 4-1 straight up at home. Winless on the road still, Calgary, 0-5, but 4-1 at home. So we got them at McMahon Stadium this week, and now we've only got them 2.5 3-point home favorites where they've played very good football at home this year. And normally when Calgary's been this 3-point favorite or less at home, I'm usually right away looking at Calgary. But even in the recent home games, they lost to Ottawa, their last home game, on the Lewis Ward last play of the game field goal, which won it for the Red Blacks for their to hand Calgary their first home loss of the year. The Toronto game that they won at home before that, 27-23, they were down big at halftime. They had a horrible first half, but they came all the way back and they won that game, and they ended up covering the original number and win by 4. But that was not an easy game. That was a game they could have lost at home. So even though they are 4-1 at home, They lost their last home game. They could have lost the home game before that, maybe should have, against Toronto. BC, they only won by 1 point before that at McMahon Stadium, 25-24. So they've won their last 3 home games. Winnipeg, BC, and Toronto. 3 of their last 4 home games they've won. But the 3 games they won at home were a 3-point win, a 1-point win, and a 4-point win. They're not winning games easily or comfortably or by margin. And so even though Calgary's only laying 3 here right now, this could be a 3-point win for Calgary. This could be a 2-point win, 1-point win for Calgary. But I also think Edmonton could still come in here and win, because I think they're actually chomping at the bit, the Elks, after letting C1 slip by against Montreal last week. I think playing a team like the Alouettes toughens up Edmonton, makes them ready to play a good game here against Calgary. So even though Calgary's got the nice straight-up home record, 4-1 at McMahon, even though Calgary's off a bye week, a coach that historically has a very good track record off a bye week in Dave Dickinson, I'm leaning Edmonton here, because I've committed here the last few weeks that Edmonton's undervalued. Edmonton's playing their best football. They've now covered 4 straight, and I've been on a couple of them. It's almost at that point where it's like, you got to ride it now with Edmonton. Even though they're only getting 3 here, it feels like if this game was 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, Edmonton's getting at least 4.5, 5 in this game, at least, not just 3. But I still think, God, Edmonton looks like they're going in this direction. Calgary looks like they're going in that direction. I got to be honest. That's what I see when I'm looking at these 2 teams right now. So I still lean Edmonton at +3. I put it this way, I'm not laying it with Calgary. I'll see if I'm going to get to the window with Edmonton. I'm not sure about that yet, but I won't be on Calgary. Even though they got the good home record, 4-1, they're off a bye. I just feel Edmonton's the better team right now. And I can't believe I'm saying that, knowing that McLeod Bethel Thompson is probably going to start again here in this game. I'm not totally sure that Trey Ford's going to be ready to come back. I think when Trey Ford is ready to return from his injury, he will be back as the starting quarterback, even though actually MBT has been okay here since Trey Ford got injured. But what was not okay about MBT is, how can you play a good first half like that and get shut out the second half? You got to somehow put up points. If you put up any sort of points in that second half, you might still win that game against Montreal last week. That's what you get from MBT sometimes. Could look good one quarter, bad the next. One drive, look good, bad the next. One half, look good, bad the next. Too much of that shit sometimes from McLeod Bethel Thompson. So, when I look at this matchup here, I still think you got Edmonton on the upward trajectory. I can't say that about Calgary, who have lost 2 in a row going into that bye week, 3 of their last 4, and every recent win they've had has been by the skin of their fucking teeth. 4-point win against Toronto at home, 1-point win against BC at home, 3-point win against Winnipeg at home. That's not a team I'm laying points with. And then every other game's been a loss. That's not a team I'm laying points with. And especially when I feel Edmonton's playing the better football right now. So again, that doesn't mean I'm going to get involved and bet it for sure, but I lean with Edmonton here. I also lean over. I know Edmonton's defense is playing a little bit better here in recent weeks. They played a great first half against Montreal. Excellent first half, but they didn't play a great full game. And Calgary's defense, to me, I don't know what's happened to them, but they're getting worse by the week. They better hope this bye week straightens things out for Brett Monson. And that who's the defensive coordinator here for Calgary. They better hope this bye week gets them going because that defense was getting worse and worse by the week going in to the bye. They gave up 33 at Ottawa. They gave up 39 on the road against the Argos, and that was a Cam Dukes Argos team. Let's not forget that. 39 points in that game, and then 31 in the loss to Ottawa with Jeremiah Masoli at quarterback that night, making his first start in over a year, second start in like 2 years. I mean, that's what we're looking at for Calgary's defense. They've been a downward trending defense the last few weeks. So 3 straight overs as well for Calgary coming into this game. You look at the recent history of Edmonton versus Calgary, over City, 7-2 to the over in the last 9 meetings between these Alberta rivals. Last year, the games were crazy high scoring, especially the game in Calgary, 35-31 for the Stampeders, 66 points. Like I said, 7-2 to the over. I would only look at an over here, 51.5. Again, check the weather. This game is still, several days away next Monday. But right now, Edmonton lean, over lean for me here when it comes to the Elks and the Stampeders. All right, there you go. That is CFL Week 13 preview and analysis. Shout out to everyone tuning in. Hit the like button on the way out if you haven't done so already. I didn't want to go into too much detail about the injury reports because, again, these games are a little bit later this week because of the Labor Day weekend dynamic. So you got, 2 Monday games, Sunday night game with Winnipeg, Saskatchewan. The first game of the week isn't until Saturday with Ottawa, BC. So we don't have great clarity as far as injuries are concerned. So I tried to stay away from talking too much about that. But either way, the injury situations aren't going to impact my early leans and early opinions that I've given you right now. I know for Ottawa, BC, it's a lean BC and an over. It's probably BC and over side or two, although I feel better about the total in that game than BC. Saskatchewan, I do like a Sunday night neutral on the total. It's hard to bet an over with Winnipeg right now. Toronto, Hamilton, not great feel right now, but I think at 5.5, Hamilton's going to at least play hard, and maybe that's enough to get him a cover at the very least. And then Edmonton, Calgary, like I just said, lean Edmonton, lean over. But we do have to make one of those a best bet. It's probably Ottawa, BC over again if I had to choose a best bet right now. But I want to do something different since I used Ottawa, BC over last week as my best bet. I don't want to go back and use the same thing. Although I do like the over again between the Red Blacks and Lions on Saturday. What will I go with instead for best bet? I'm going to go to that Winnipeg-Saskatchewan game. I'm going to go with Saskatchewan here. Look, they shouldn't have won. They shouldn't have even covered, but they did. And their defense just fought their guts out to keep Toronto out of the end zone and force the turnover on downs 3 times at the 1-yard line. That defense played hard. I think back home, you're going to see Trevor Harris, who doesn't usually play 2 really bad games in a row. He'll be better. Remember, he played great against an excellent Montreal team and an excellent Montreal defense 2 weeks ago. I think he resembles more that version of Trevor Harris this weekend. I'll go Saskatchewan here, minus 140 on the money line against Winnipeg to get the job done and snap this little losing streak they're on. Saskatchewan, money line against Winnipeg for my best bet. That's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed the CFL Week 13 edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. I'm Ian Cameron. Enjoy the games and good luck. And thanks for watching the CFL Week 13 edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy.